Okay, so Fest 3 for cargo and commercial ship marine surveyors is continuing. Delighted now to welcome Captain Michael Lloyd. Michael and I go back, I think, 5 or 6 years now, actually, and he's spoken a couple of times on enclosed spaces. We're coming back again to enclosed spaces because it's such a horrendous scenario, and Michael is passionate about it, as you will hear. When I spoke to him about setting this session up, he said, I'm going to hit them hard. And I know you will, Michael. I know you have some very strong views about why people continue to die in enclosed spaces on ships. So lovely to see you. Thank you very much for being here. Without further ado, I'll hand over to you.
Good, thanks very much. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all participants, wherever you are. Before I start, we're dealing with something here that a lot of you think you know all about it. A lot of you think you've heard all about it. Hearing is very important, but knowledge, you don't know all about it. This is one of our problems. If you knew all about it, then why the hell are people dying in these spaces? Telling you this, that more people are dying in enclosed spaces than for any other reason at sea. So this is not just a small subject. And the purpose of this morning is, one, I just want to revise a bit with you our problem that you're facing at sea. And believe me, surveyors are the most vulnerable because you don't know the ship, you don't know the space, you're relying on ship's crews who in many cases are completely untrained. And you're relying on that, and then you're looking at your watch to get to the next job. All of this adds up to a disaster. So we'll run through that. Then I want to tell you, or suggest to you, that's better, how you can protect yourself a bit better than possibly people coming on board the ships in ports are doing at the moment. Okay, so let's move now to the first problem. Okay. This is something we designed, 10 years ago or 12 years ago for industry. And it went all around the world, and it is being used in many places now. One change, we used to put culture at the bottom. Well, now we're putting legislation. And legislation, you'll hear, is our problem. However, if you look at the other three, design, training, and equipment, they also come into the picture, and this is what is causing or causative of many of our problems that we are dealing with. So let's go from there to the design and look at some of our problems. Height, width of the space, the lack of forced ventilation in many spaces, restricted access, the lightning holes, the manholes, the lack of illumination. I mean, you can have a swimming pool, right, with underwater lighting. And yet, for some reason, they can't put lighting into tanks and things like that we could have when we go down. Manholes, I'll talk to you about that in a minute. Vertical or horizontal entry, both present different problems, especially for the oxygen levels. And this is, of course, the most important. You're going to have accidents. You're going to slip on broken ladders, all things like that. You're going to find mud everywhere. You're going to have no handholds. All of those exist, and all of those cause problems. Lot of injuries and deaths from just purely accidents not related to oxygen. We can look at that as well, but that's the ship's problems and the owner's problems, and they don't do much about it. Believe me, I know. I was at sea for 50 years. Right, 90-degree corners, another problem. Poor communications, that's a hell of a problem on ships, because you might have a good communication set, but the ship probably doesn't. Right, let's have a look at next. Look at this, manhole sizes. There's just one example. You've got to go through those holes, right, to get in sometime into a tank. Do you know that those sizes haven't changed for about 70 years? Now, when you talk to the Royal Society of Naval Architects, they say, no, there's no problem. We can design bigger ones. And you say, well, why aren't you? Well, no one's asked for it. Then you go to the owners and you say, well, why aren't you asking for a bigger size? Oh, yeah, it's something we leave to the shipyards. They conform to legislation. Then you go to the shipyards and say, why aren't you building manholes of bigger size? And they say, well, no one's asking for it. See that film, Catch-22? You could have bigger sizes. But the trouble is that they're building ships now to plans that they made 10, 15, 20 years ago, and they still think that they can carry on like this. And anyway, they don't have to go in them. You do. Now, that's an interesting one. That's supposed to be a little lightning hole. You're supposed to be able to crawl through that. I think if you look at one of our chaps there, this is the company that Mines Rescue Marine that I helped form. You can see the problem that is occurring down in that bilge. And that's an engine room bilge. You might have experienced that. I certainly have. There's your manhole. Now you can see from that how difficult it is just getting a stretcher out. And now that's a specially designed enclosed space stretcher, by the way. No ship's got it. All the industry ashore use them. The guy in there hasn't got a tank on. Now, you've got the people rescuing you are going to have to get down through there with a standard fire BA set on, because the only safety equipment the ship's got, 99%, will be fire equipment. It's not going to do it, is it? That's a good one. Imagine a shipyard building that. Now, strangely, we got in there. That was one of our jobs. We had to get into that space behind all that, the cabling. And then on the right-hand side there, you can see another area there. That's the place there where a guy had been badly injured. He'd slipped inside there on a pipe and they couldn't get him out. They called our company and in we went. That's us showing after the event, showing the difficulty to the owners of the ship. Of course, as they said, well, the ship's built now, isn't it? Okay. Now that is what you would call stupidity at its highest. You see, let's say you can get through the manhole at the top with equipment on. Well, how the hell do you get through the next bit? Just look at it. But that's approved. And that's been passed by class. As class also have got to learn a few things, but that's been approved and passed. And why do they pass it? Well, they said because that's in the book. That's allowed. You can do that. You can have holes like that. Okay. Right. Training and equipment. What training is being given now to these ships to prepare them for you going on board and hopefully being rescued if something goes wrong? Now, no training or equipment is required. It's simple as that. The only legislation that they say is periodic drills. Now, having been in also the military for 35 years in the Royal Naval Reserve, I know what a drill is. It's a totally different thing than training. And as I've said there, that's what a drill is. It's intended to ensure that the training that they've been given is adequate. Okay? Now, if you can't be drilled, if you have got no training, and you can't be drilled if you've got no equipment. So the poor ships, what do? Well, they drill with the fire equipment. And they get a boiler suit and they stuff it with paper and they put it on a stretcher and lift it around a bit and say, there we are, we can do a rescue. And I'm sad to say, really, I'm not exaggerating, on many ships. There are ships, of course, that will intensify and do things far better. There are even owners out there who might well supply some enclosed space equipment. I haven't met one. That's the problem. Now, what equipment should exist if you're going to be going down into these spaces? We've got the harness, right? Now, why do you want the harness? Well, because the harness is something we can clip the line onto you and haul you out. If you haven't got a harness, it means that time's got to be spent trying to put something on you that's going to pull you out. Inevitably, it'll just be like a belt around your waist. They'll heave away on that and possibly damage your back. So a harness is rather important for PPE. And that's really what you should be wearing when you go into these deep tanks and into the double bottoms and places. Helmet. Well, your torch in your pocket isn't much good, really. Think about it. And then a handheld walkie-talkie. Well, you know, what's that for? Because that's 2 hands occupied already, and you've got to go down a ladder 80 foot down into the cofferdam. You need something, a good helmet that's not going to fall off halfway down, that's got a light on it, and has got communications. Okay. Now we come to your oxygen gas detector. I want to talk about that a bit further on, if I may. The compact enclosed space BA set, right? Well, that is for the ship to have. It is a specially designed one. We helped the design actually in Mines Rescue Marine, and it's compact. It's got 40 minutes duration, but it's about half the size of the fire one. And that's the one now used standard in most of the mines, or what's ever left of the mines in the UK. And it's not just coal, by the way. They have salts, and you've got copper, and you've got things. You'd be surprised the number of mines that are still around. And they use the compact ones by legislation. Okay, man riding winch, vertical space rescue. That is a winch that you put up around, if you can, around the entry point to hold you up on the harness. The collapsible rigid stretcher. Well, I showed you that before. It's very easy to get in. You can have it any width you like just by moving it, sliding in and out there. It's rigid, so you don't bend your back and break your neck or anything. And it's very, very good at sliding people out and through the lightning holes in double bottoms. Now, the resuscitator, that's essential. I'll get to that later, if I may. The emergency escape breathing apparatus. Well, this should be in your possession. When you get on board the ship, they should give you one. Whether it's been used or not, God knows. But they'll give you one possibly on a good ship. But I think it'd be better if you had your own. And it's only for use in emergency. We've had a number of people killed who actually think that because they couldn't get in the manhole to get the people out inside, they put one of those on. And they ended up collapsing on the body of the person they were supposed to be rescuing, you know, and that's not good. I'm trying to think. No, I've never hauled anyone out because of that, but I've done some of the mining accidents, and you know, it's not pretty hauling people out. Here we go. Now, you have got that marvelous oxygen detector. Yeah, and gas in your hand, possibly when you go into these spaces. But the problem that you're facing, and indeed we faced on the ship, was that there is no international regulation as to the alarm setting. Now, what I've tried to show you here is the settings that are tolerated in most of those countries. You'll see, and none of these are maritime, by the way. These are the government ones that they use ashore, and the ones the manufacturers will follow, and they will put on board the ship. One is the low setting, the others are the high setting, yeah? The high setting, of course, as you know, is just as important because of the fires that can be caused by the oxygen being too rich. Now, the lower ones are there. You'll see that 19.5 Australia, 18 Canada. I don't know what country that one is. I've forgotten now. I can't see it. I've got screen saying up there. But anyway, 19.5, the next one. Singapore, 19.5. And United Kingdom, 20 to 23, 19.5. Now, from that, we used to say on to clients and shipping companies and people like that who we talked to, is that we recommended 19.5 as a setting, a safe setting. The IMO, and believe this one, the IMO, International Maritime Organization, came out with a recommendation that it should be 22. Now that causes a problem because the study that I'm sitting in here, right, is hopefully about 20.8, which is the average. But it won't be 28 because I'm in the study, breathing air and stuff like that. So probably about 20.3. Now, if your setting is at 22, when you get your new set on board your ship and you open it up and switch it on, the alarm's going to sound, isn't it? Well, we pointed this out to the IMO that 22 was ridiculous. Possibly we shouldn't have told them that, but my God, they are a pain in the arse. But they still didn't change it. So if the ship is going to conform to the IMO, they'll have them set at 22. Manufacturers will set them at 22. So you're left with just what do you do? Well, you have your own personal one, of course. And we recommend 19.5, but this is the difficulty. Let's say you go to Shanghai in summer and you're messing around on the ships there. You won't find 19.5 sometimes. Shanghai can get down to 17. Now, that means then that your alarm's going to keep going off and you won't go into the space because it's not safe. Now, to what we would, yourselves, to professional people like yourselves, not crew, but professional people like you, what we say is, look, what you should be looking for is the difference in air and oxygen content between what's outside the space and what's inside it. Now that will tell you if there's a problem. So you open up the hole and the air outside you check. Then if it's a vertical, you lower down the your detector just a few feet, just to see that entrance, and you'll see the difference. If there is a difference, then you don't go in until you can clarify what the problem is. It's that simple. So that's what we would recommend to pros like you. Look at that difference between outside and inside to give you the indication of a problem. And meanwhile, it'd be nice if we could have an international clarification and all have the same things, and the manufacturers make these to have the same setting. That's now, you know, I talked to you about the emergency breathing apparatus. This one here is just over 40 quid, and it could save your life. I would recommend that you get something like this. I mean, if you're terribly wealthy, then you get a better one. But this is the basic. That's got a couple of minutes there. And that's the difference between life and death. It's just a thought that you could have one of those. By the way, it's not the big one. That's the packaging it comes in. But you can see how small it is. Clips onto your belt or something like that. And that could save your life for £40. So in other words, now you're not reliant on the ship giving you one. And indeed, when you ask for one on a lot of ships, they'll look at you very strangely. Who the hell is this? What's he want one of these for? I would recommend you get one of those. This shows some of the kit in use. All right, there's your resuscitator up there at the top left corner. Below is the helmets that we used in the Mines Rescue Marine. And you can see there, it's got this, unfortunately you can't see the light that's on the top there, but it's got a light. And look at the comms that we've got there. Good comms, able to go through the steel in the DB. Walkie-talkies that the ship's got, honestly, many of them, you get 10 foot into a tank and the guys outside can't hear you. That's not much good, is it? The top there, right-hand corner, you can see there the man riding winch, and the guy's also got the harness on, and you can see down on the bottom side there the yellow straps that these guys have got on. That is the harness. Nobody ashore with any sense would go into any enclosed space without a harness on these days. And don't forget, ashore they've got all the kit and the legislation and everything. We haven't got it. But that gives you an idea of the seriousness which in the Mines Rescue we used to try and take. And we must have examined, on behalf of owners and people like that, about 60 ships and in the region of 30 oil platforms. Not one ship came to scratch and not one oil platform. Not one rescue team on the ships or the platforms came up to our scratch until we gave them the training course. And that's what we were there for, to do the training course. And that included Royal Navy. Hey, they were one of the worst. Okay, that gives you an idea. Right, moving on. And this is not a joke. It might be laughable, it is. But 3 men died about 2 years ago. I don't know if any of you remember, you might. About 2 years ago on a ship off West Africa. It was a British ship. And that was the only equipment they had to get the bodies out, because they were bodies. They just couldn't get to them in time. And they used rope. It's amazing more don't die, frankly. And the trouble is, the people that die are the ones that are blamed. They're blamed. And I can never understand why all these organizations and all these shipping companies are blaming the people when they don't supply any kit and they don't supply any training to people. But it's always the guys who went in, it's their fault. They shouldn't have gone in. Oh, they didn't do this or they didn't do that. No, that's too easy. That's the easy way out. And you'll find that most of the accident investigation people, even ours, take the easiest way. They've got to really go into it and come out with the truth. You know what? That's the legislation on enclosed spaces. IMO. Yeah, well, what do you expect of an organization that auctions off the head position to the highest bidder? Right, now let's come to the ship. That's a good one, isn't it? That, something that, well, you guys might like to see it because that, you've got all the money sorting it out, but not for me. Right, responsibility issue. Who is responsible on the ship that you're boarding? Let's say you're on the jetty and this ship manages to stagger alongside, and you've got to go on board and help them keep it afloat. Well, if you just look at that, that's in the dry dock, by the way. We took those pictures. I don't know what to say, really. There's no rails up. There's no hard hats on the guy there. These guys facing up. But I'm laughing, but it's going on all the time. in these dry docks. It's it. Now, who is responsible? Okay, in a dry dock. Now, I'll tell you what happens when the ship comes in. The dry dock safety people, foreman, manager, the manager for the ship, all come on board. And they say, okay, Mike, we're in charge of safety. And I used to be on the ship, and you look out of your cabin window, and you see them, that they're opening about 10 manholes all at the same time. You're kind of looking around for the rescue party. No, there isn't any of those. They assume that they can do this, that they can actually walk on ships and say, we're in charge of safety, we'll look after it, don't worry. Well, I'll tell you what, if there's an accident, you see that if you don't have to worry as a captain, because those guys that said that, they're heading for the hills. And they never said it, of course. Now, I'll tell you this. This is impossible for them to say this, for anyone to say this. There it is. Stevedores and other contractors who board the ship, right, are completely under the master, who has a duty to provide such protection. There's no argument with this. As long as that ship is displaying the flag of whichever Mickey Mouse island it belongs to, and the captain and the crew are signed on, everybody coming on there is under the captain. That's it. So you are now reliant on the master and his officers for your protection. Yeah. Now, this is what I'm going to say to you. Self-protection. You cannot and you must not rely on these people. They've had no training. It's not their fault here. No training or rescue. They won't have the correct equipment. Their drills and exercises they have done in most cases will have been inadequate to save life. And that's what it's about. They will not have made any correct risk assessment of the space you are entering. Now you'll say, well, hang on a minute. They've got a risk assessment done. It's in their book and all that. Yes, I know they got that done. When was it done? Do they have a risk assessment for each tank and each space? If they've done a risk assessment for each tank and its space, that means that they have knowledge of each tank and each space on their ship. That's a good one. I'm just trying to move on for some reason. Ah, there we are. Now, that's it. Okay. Boarding checks. This is what, again, this is what should happen, and there's no reason why you cannot ask for this. Look, the ship initiates a survey requirement. Okay, so you send it in and say what you want done. The company or ship then decide, surveying company, usually they've got a contract with the company. Anyway, they should send, right, the assessment for that very space or spaces that they want the surveyors to enter, and plan for the spaces to be entered to the survey or the survey company. The surveyor checks the risk assessment and equipment available. The surveyors advise the company if the equipment and rescue plan is acceptable. If not, an alternative agreement is reached between you or your company and them. And then the contractors could be required to be called in to stand by as a rescue team. And this is one of the things that we used to do. We would stand by. And increasingly, we were being called and called more and more to stand by difficult jobs and things like that. Right. Ask to see the risk assessment of the space. SOLAS enclosed space requirements. Now this is so for IMO, but they've got this wonderful word should instead of must, and they're very good at giving suggestions of what should be done. And there's that lovely IMO word, should. I often think that every Secretary General of the IMO should have the word should hammered in on his gravestone. Owners should carry out a risk assessment to identify all enclosed spaces. The risk assessment should be carried out periodically to remain there valid. Well, that's yeah, of course. I mean, I'm certain you've been down spaces where the last time the ladder was checked was about 20 years ago. And God knows how the rungs have stayed in place on some of them. But yes, things change. So if the changes are done, what it really means is that say once every year or 2 years, they should be inspected and then categorized of what's wrong with them. Any repairs that need doing should then be carried out or put down to be done ashore. Internal audits by the owners of the ship safety management should be verified that the established procedures are complied with in practice. Yeah. When you next go on a ship, ask them if you could see this risk assessment of all the different spaces. And they'll have a risk assessment, yeah. All the DBs, there you are. There's your risk assessment. All the wing tanks, all the holes. Now, each one should have one. And then the date, when was it done? Was that risk assessment done before you came on, just before you came on board? Or was it done 6 months ago for the last survey and they just pulled it out? Your check on boarding, risk assessment, action plan. What's their action plan if it goes wrong? Permits. Oh, safe to work permits and all those, yes, yeah, I've seen them and how they're done. The rescue plan. Yeah, a rescue plan. Have they got a rescue plan, or do they just get a guy standing outside with a bit of rope? Oh, and a walkie-talkie, of course, and got a walkie-talkie. The enclosed space assessment sheet, IMO recommendation. So they should have that. The ventilation log, have they got one? No, but they might have it put in the ship's logbook, which, as you know, is an absolutely sacred document, and every single word in it is true. Right. Now we come to the resuscitator. Well, oh, I'm sorry, got the wrong bit. But anyway, somewhere I'll have the resuscitator, but I want to talk about the resuscitator later. Dynamic risk assessment. I think that of all the assessments, that's important because that's your assessment. And now you and hopefully the officer accompanying you to the space should both be doing that as you approach and as you stand there and look at the site and look at the preparations around you. The risk assessment paper that they've done, yes, but this one, you make your own assessment now. They've told you this, they've told you that, but you can see it. You can judge that ship. You can judge the situation by the officers you've met or by the way the captain's paid any interest or attention to what's going on. Crew availability and efficiency, the equipment they've got, the communications they use, and the ventilation of the space. Yeah. Right, here we go. If through oxygen, lack of oxygen, there's a problem and you are now unconscious, the ship has 4 minutes to get to you before your brain damage starts. And the more I think about that, I sail with some guys who must have been down there a long time sometimes, but there you are. That's it. 4 minutes and your brain damage. The majority of rescue time on the ship, getting you out, it's getting you out. It's not getting into you. A good rescue team standing by with good training will get to you in that 4 minutes, hopefully. Or they shouldn't be allowing you to go in the first place. But anyway, but then when they've got to you, they've got to get you out. And I tell you from experience, nobody is going to get you out of a DB or even a cofferdam or wing tank in 4 minutes. So if the rescue team has got a resuscitator, and a lot of ships actually started carrying these, and they can get to you, get that resuscitator on, hell, they can sit back and have a cigarette, have a cup of tea. Because now you're breathing, you're in no imminent danger now, you're breathing happily, we've got you going, and then we can get you out. But if there's no resuscitator, you're dead. Oh, you're going to come out in no condition to kind of resume normal life. Now we come down to cargoes. How are we doing on time? I think we're doing okay, actually. Assume that all cargo gives off gas. It's amazing what we found out about cargoes and what they give and what the book says about them being safe and what the actual effect is. There's new cargoes coming all the time. Steel, rusting steel, ship age, there's more rust. And even on new ships, damn it, you can have, 4 months and you go down into a cofferdam and you will see rust starting. So assume that all cargoes give off gases, and any space with those cargoes there or any space near that cargo, right? Then be careful. Now we come to ventilation. Before you go into a tank, the ship will have been advised, the tanks are, and most ships are pretty good at that. They know the space that you will be going into when you go on the ship. So they'll ventilate it. Anybody here seen a ballast tank with forced ventilation on a bulk carrier? Maybe new ones, I don't know, I haven't seen a new one for a bit. And there was certainly the many bulkers that I had no forced ventilation. And the case I'm just dealing with has got no forced ventilation. So they open it up and they say, there you are, 24 hours, because the industry actually does produce this figure and say 24 hours. It's not enough. It's not enough. I'm dealing with 3 men dying now because the tank was open. It was opened 24 hours. And the ship comes into port. And then people appear. And then they see that the hatch has been left open. And they think it's all right. And so they go down. And the top bit, yes, of course, there's fresh air at the top. But what about 80 foot down? Well, in this case, there wasn't. There wasn't. Now, if you're going to go, if you've got spaces and there's no ventilation, that ship should have tubing on board, enough to put down into that tank and force vent from the bottom. Or those lead bottom like hatches into the cofferdams, then you get a flow through. No? But many of them can't, because the cargo is still in the hole, so they can't get to open up the door down the bottom. And they haven't got tubing that long for the ship. Why haven't they got the tubing to force vent? This is nonsense. but they haven't. And if you find out that there's no force venting down that bottom, right? So the next thing, what do? We take our oxygen detector and we lower it down, if any sense, 80 foot down, and there it is, and you check it all the way. Now that will give you some reassurance. And the time, that 24 hours is nonsense. You've got to open up that tank at least for 72 hours if you want the air down the bottom to be changed. Not 24. It ain't enough. And we're now trying to tell industry it's not enough. But of course, you're not listened to, because I'm certain that they know better. You know, certainly the accountants know better. So there you are. That's ventilation, 3 more dead, and that. The other problem, of course, is when you go into horizontal spaces. Now you're thinking of your DBs, and you're going through the lightning holes. You know, you can go through, say, 2 lightning holes, and what's in that next lightning hole? Remember, the gas is heavier than air. But is that next lightning hole free of gas? Is the one beyond it? And so what, when you think of it, how are you going to do it? Well, you have a bamboo pole and you stick your detector on the end of it and push it through. Isn't it amazing? Here we are, 2021, with all the technology that around us, and we're using rope and bamboo poles. Oh, God. And they're talking of automated ships. You have to laugh. Okay. Training. Are you trained? Think of it. There's the mining boys down in Southampton there with their own training school, marine training school down there. Do you know what? I haven't had many surveyors through. Now, if you really want to look after yourselves, think about you getting yourself trained. It's only a 5-day course, I think. And I tell you, you will find things out that you never knew, and you'll be far more careful about spaces in the future once you've done that course. But that course is well worth doing. I promise you, you'll be a different person when you now go in spaces after that. Okay. The people on the ship, hey, come on. No one's paying for them to be trained properly ashore. I think we put that, Mike might well know about it. We put this training school down initially in Hythe and told all the shipping industry. It was there. And you know what? We took a hull of a ship. We could put water in, we could flood it, we could do all kinds of things. Not one shipping company sent anybody to it. Okay, here we go. This is the problem. The marine industry is legislation. Legislation. IMO is as corrupt as the flag states with the largest registries. That's not saying the IMO is, but the registries whose delegates are there, they're the ones to watch. Huh? And we know who they are: Barbados, Panama, Liberia. There you are. Position of the General Secretary is sold to the highest bidder. Last time it was Korea put the money up. God knows who will be next. The delegates are allowed to accept gifts of any kind and amount with any declaration. Not a bad job, actually, is it, when you think about it? Through the lack of legislation, this organization is responsible for the death of many of those on ships. Well, they are. They are, because they've known about deaths for the last 20 years. We've been calling for the last 15 years for something to be done on legislation, and we haven't got anything in 15 years. So our organizations must press for these legislators to stop listening to the ship owners and what they're offering, and enact the safety legislation to stop people from dying. It's so important. No, this is the ending for regrettably too many. It's not worth it, is it? Really? Not a good way to spend Christmas. So that's my presentation. I've tried to say the truth about things, and it's very sad to have to say it about ships sometimes. Don't get me wrong, there are good ships occasionally. There are good companies, but they're very far between. Get a Christmas present, get trained. Well, I think now I'm right about on time that was handed over. So listen, a Merry Christmas and a happy and a safe New Year to you all. Many thanks for listening to me. Bye-bye. Unless you have any questions.
Yes, yep. I was going to say, are there any questions, Michael? Thank you so much. It's sobering listening to you. And I think sometimes it's better that people are told the realities. Let's not sugarcoat this. It is a major, major concern and a major worry. And still it goes on. And you and I have had many conversations, and it is sad that there's a facility down the road close to us in Southampton, and ship owners don't send delegates. You know, we need to try and get some surveyors to go down there as well, and all of those things. But just a sad state of affairs. And I think I've said to you, and I've said before, I mean, when I came into this industry 7 years ago, not from a marine background, and the first thing I noticed is signing up to some news feeds, and every day on the news feed, somebody dies somewhere, not just of enclosed spaces, but all these other associated things that everybody knows about.
Yeah.
And I was shocked, truly shocked. And I started telling my friends, and I said, you know, guess what? You know, 10 people died in a ship. Some people died on a quayside in the Philippines, I think it was. And they said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, that's what happens. That's the industry. So always good to labour the health and safety issues. It is dangerous work. And at the end of the day,
the sad thing, Mike, is that because of the publicity now that's been given to enclosed spaces, is that many owners now and many countries are stopping reporting the accidents. Mm. You know, we say that we've got, say 100 dead of the countries that are reporting it. Well, there's only about 20% of countries doing the reports. So you think of how many actually are dying in these spaces. And then think of the fact that we're not learning, because if these things aren't reported and the reasons, we can't carry on learning.
Yeah.
So yeah, so there is undoubtedly a cover-up. I've seen recent reports now where people had died in holds, and instead they died on the ship. Yeah. So these are things also going on now. Anyway, I do hope that it has some effect.
Well, Ed has popped a question into chat actually, Michael. What is the opinion on safe for entry certificate issued by marine chemists? Do you know? Oh
yeah, that's a good one. If the chemists are called in, and again, responsible companies are actually calling the chemists in to do the checks, and they don't just check for the oxygen, of course, they check for the gases and stuff like that and things. And the gases are important without a doubt. But I know we always concentrated on the fact, can you breathe it or can't you breathe? And that's it. But yeah, I'm all for it. And I do think then that there's no reason why a surveyor can't ask to see it when he boards the ship. And then, or before, it's better if he talks to the ship's agent and says, is there a chemist certificate for that space? Then that might jolt a few people into taking action. I'm all for it.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, look, thank you ever so much. As always, a pleasure to spend time with you, Michael. And I owe you a beer, apparently.
Yes, absolutely. A pleasure again.
Or a wee dram. So thank you very much. And we'll catch up soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.